Have you played Poppy Playtime Chapter 3 yet? Did you notice all of the hidden details? I've been slowly picking apart the whole game, looking for clues, secrets, Easter eggs, and less obvious details that could help us figure out what exactly is going on inside this terrifying factory. I have a couple of theories I'm working on, potentially the biggest one on the channel yet. I think I have an explanation for the entire game after playing this chapter, so stay tuned for that one. But in the meantime, you guys enjoyed the 10 things you might have missed video for Chapter 3 so much that I'm bringing you even more. Hello everybody, my name is Tericho, and here are 5 more things you might have missed in Poppy Playtime Chapter 3. Number 1. Everyone needs a friend. In Chapter 3, there was a moment with Kissy Missy that seemed to come out of nowhere. We can find her in Home Sweet Home, sitting silently, staring at a photograph of one of the orphans. The two best explanations for this moment are that either this was Kissy Missy before she underwent the scientific process and was turned into a doll, or this was a close friend of hers before the transformation. With a little bit of closer inspection, I think we can find our answer. Right on the wall behind Kissy, you can see a child's drawing that shows Kissy and the words "Friends Forever." Right next to that, you can see a picture that shows 2 orphans that appear to be friends. Now all of this might seem pretty obvious. Playtime Co. used the bigger bodies for work, but they also used the bigger bodies as a way to keep children happy. That was, after all, Elliot's mission, to bring smiles to children. This mirrors many of the children's television shows of the 80s and 90s, with many of those having colourful creatures that lived alongside children. But there is actually far more to this theme than you might think. In Chapter 2, we learnt that not only were these toys placed strategically for the children, but also for the experiments. In one of the notes we found in Chapter 2, it was explained that Mommy had become hostile towards the staff, but very motherly towards the children. This all makes a lot of sense now. Mommy knew exactly what those children were going through. Mommy Longlegs was once an orphan in Playcare called Marie Payne, and she was noted for having extreme nightmares, something we assume was caused by the gas. Eventually, she would undergo the scientific process, something that we have seen can be horrifically traumatizing, and her consciousness was transferred into a bigger body's Mommy Longlegs. So Mommy knew that these children were being held here, knew they were being experimented on, knew they were being gassed to send them all to sleep. All under the orders of a bunch of scientists, many of whom we have seen have their own agendas and evil sides. No wonder Mommy began to resent them, but this is precisely why she was placed in the game station. When surrounded by children, she behaved much more calmly, because she knew her presence could be terrifying to the other children. It was almost a form of blackmail. The staff knew she wouldn't lash out in front of the children. She didn't want to scare them like she had been. In fact, we even get another hint of this with Catnap. When he was first placed in Playcare, it visibly upset some of the children. Most eventually got used to him, with some becoming his friend, but like most things in Playtime Co., everything is done for the benefit of the company. This could even be another form of Playtime Co. manipulation though. Knowing that many of these bigger bodies were planned to be part of the workforce, getting the children used to them early would be a benefit to the company. Any of these children that would end up working in the factory later, or being experimented on, would be more used to the idea of them. Desensitized, if you will. In a cruel twist of irony, Kissy Missy continued her friendship with one of the orphans after being transferred into a bigger body. They stayed best friends, her old friend accepting her new form, which makes the fact that Kissy was transferred to storage even more upsetting. This could even be why Kissy fought these staff to free herself. She might have been trying to get back to Playcare to check on her friends. Remember, we still have no idea what happened to the children during the Hour of Joy. Catnap tells Mr. Light that they are safe, but we don't know who we can trust at this point. My guess is 1006 really did want to save them, but that just begs the question, where did they all go? Number 2. Funny money. Now this is a tiny little detail that I bet a lot of people missed, but it might actually have far more relevance than you realize. Around the Playcare, you can find a made-up currency called Funbucks. You can find a bunch of it in the head of Toy Store, Eduardo Gala's office. Now at first glance, this just appears to be toy money, similar to Monopoly money. At first I thought this was just a toy currency the staff would use in games for the children, but there is actually more to it than that. If you take a closer look at the vending machines around the Playcare, you will see that they state they accept Funbucks. A little bit odd for them to accept a toy currency like this, right? Well, not really. We know from Harley Sawyer's tape in Project Playtime that the company was in trouble. Big trouble. Between a dwindling toy industry, lawsuits, huge staff costs, and now we know why, research costs, and finally the upkeep of all those orphans, Playtime Co. was bleeding money. This was one of the driving reasons behind the Bigger Bodies initiative, the process of transferring living people into dull bodies. It saved the company money in wages and lawsuits. This is another possible reason why the Hour of Joy happened. There just wasn't enough human staff to keep on top of everything, making it easier for the toys to rebel. But knowing the lengths the company was going to in order to save money, I wouldn't put it past them to start paying the staff in fun bucks either. Why reward your employees with valuable real money when you can just pay them in fun bucks that they can spend on snack food and toys that they create? Just one more example of how terrible a company Playtime Co. really was. Number 3. Rich is everywhere. In Chapter 3, we get a bunch more VHS tapes that give us little snippets of backstory and lore. But one character, Rich, has appeared in all 3 chapters now. In Chapter 1, Rich was the disgruntled production worker, loudly complaining about the lack of maintenance and pressure from the higher-ups.
It's just hard to be happy about it when manufacturing's on our necks about it, because we can't find stupid hockey boxes! Rich.
Trust me, from my days in retail, I feel you, Richie, I feel you, man. This started to give us hints that the factory was slowly starting to fail. With the lack of staff and funding, the main production of the factory was starting to stall. They couldn't even keep up with the manufacture of their most popular toy, Huggy, as Rich complains about not being able to find Huggy boxes. But did the company listen to his complaints? No, of course not. In Chapter 2, we learned that for bringing these very valid concerns to light, Rich was rewarded by being demoted to the rejected toy area. That VHS actually gives us a small hint about the company though. In that recording, we hear Rich go on a rant about the demotion. At the end, he asks why he's talking to himself, heavily implying that the company records the staff conversations in secret, something that is hinted towards several times throughout the chapters. But Chapter 3 has another Rich VHS that is a little bit more confusing. In this tape, we hear a conversation between Rich and yet another unknown staff member, Stuart. In this tape, we hear that Rich is trying to calm down his famous temper, something he is doing to try and be a better husband to his wife. But Stuart tells Rich that he believes he is an honest and hardworking man. In fact, he's coming up to his retirement and he's even considering choosing Rich as his replacement. Now, it's not entirely clear yet what Stuart's role in the company was, but it was clearly higher up than Rich's. This means that Rich has worked all over the factory. He's worked in the toy production areas, the rejected toy room, and now we see he is traveling into Playcare, something I believe many staff never saw. In fact, in Chapter 3, it's heavily implied that this elevator was supposed to be operated by 2 people, with the handles being on opposite sides of the room, meaning that no singular person was ever supposed to use this elevator, probably a way to stop nosy staff ever making it into this area by accident. But regardless, we see that Rich has extensive knowledge of what was going on in Playtime Co. We also see that despite all that gruff, as Stuart calls it, he seems to be a good man, putting his annoyances aside for the children and working on his own issues for his wife. In fact, some people have already speculated that the player character is actually Rich. At this point, he is as good a candidate as any. We still don't know what his eventual fate was, but if he finally had enough and quit the factory, that could explain why he wasn't present for the Hour of Joy. I'll be going into this in more depth in future theories, but I think Rich is potentially linked to the Hour of Joy far more than we know. 1006 seemed to be trying to save the toys, and as I said in my previous 10 things you might have missed video, it's possible he used human staff to help him free them. He likely tried to recruit allies just like he did with Theodore, and it's possible that the staff who really did care about the orphans may have had a hand in the downfall of the factory. But either way, we now have several staff members who have appeared in all 3 chapters. Stella, the scientist, and Rich all must be important to the story for them to keep popping up like this. I hope we get some further information in Chapter 4. Number 4. Catnap Radio. Chapter 3 contains a bunch of little Easter eggs and references to real-life people just like previous chapters. The heads of departments in Chapter 3, for example, being environmental artists that worked on the game. Another small Easter egg in Chapter 3 that you might have missed is this Catnap sat next to a radio near the counselor's office. If you listen to it, you can hear this small segment of music on a loop. According to people in the Partners in Crime Discord, the official partner program for Poppy Playtime, this is actually a small segment of an unreleased song by YouTuber CG5, who is known for his fan songs of games such as Five Nights at Freddy's and Bendy and the Ink Machine. Not only is this song an actual bop, and now I need to go and listen to more, but this isn't the first time someone in the mascot horror sphere has been referenced like this. In Chapter 2, we got the famous Easter egg of Jacksepticeye, who's played many horror games on his channel, Bonzo Bunny referenced Markiplier's birthday, and we even got a cameo from horror producer and director Eli Roth. Chapter 3 is continuing these homages with CG5 and also the reference to MatPat's retirement in Home Sweet Home. We even have potential links to Bendy and the Ink Machine, with the ARG between Chapter 2 and 3 telling us that the prototype leaves traces of tar, and in Chapter 3 we get called Poppy's Angel. Maybe a stretch, but possibly a little nod to my favourite character from Bendy, Alice Angel. Apparently I like crazy, but something I've recently come to the conclusion of is that there are far more references like this than we ever knew. Chapter 3's cable car sequence felt like something out of Bioshock or Half-Life, and there are even a bunch of references to the Portal series that I'm going to be covering when I eventually get around to the Lemon theory. No, that's not a joke, this is an actual theory that's on my list. This Portal reference though actually leads me very nicely onto the next point. Number 5. Chapter 3 has a recurring theme that almost no one is talking about. Throughout the chapter you can find a bunch of references to space. Hoppy Hopscotch's cutout talks about hopping to the moon, Dog Day's poster shows him in space, and you can find planets hanging from the ceiling in the school. Now perhaps this is once again just a little nod to Portal. In that game, one of the personality cores really enjoyed space, and that itself was a foreshadow to how we ended Portal 2, opening a portal to the moon. But again, it could mean so much more than that. Playtime Co. has several links to Russia, with Russian text being found in Kissy Missy's VHS, and a military grade box in Chapter 2 with Russian text on it as well. The Dog Day poster could also be a nod to this. Laika was a dog who was famously one of the first animals to ever be sent to space. This poor puppy was rescued from the streets of Moscow, only to be sent into orbit aboard Sputnik 2. At the time, they didn't know a lot about the effects of spaceflight on living beings, so Laika was used as a guinea pig. This has obvious connections to Poppy Playtime. Laika was sent into space as an effort to push the boundaries of science. She didn't survive the trip, and she was never expected to. The Soviets knew that she wouldn't survive the return to Earth as the technology to safely deorbit hadn't even been invented yet. Playtime Co. similarly pushed the boundaries of science, and they too were willing to sacrifice life to do so. We know they tested the scientific process on humans, but Chapter 2 tells us that they originally started these experiments on mice before moving on to larger test subjects. Now we know that means they moved on to human test subjects, but this could also be a possible hint that they experimented on other animals too. In fact, this isn't the only horror story from Russia that we could tie with Poppy Playtime. The Russian sleep experiment is an infamous creepypasta. The story tells of an experiment in the Soviet Union in the late 1940s. 5 men were locked in a chamber that was filled with a stimulant gas to keep them awake. They were all falsely promised to be freed if they could stay awake for 30 days. After being kept awake for several days, the men began to turn crazy. Some of them started to scream, others covered up the small portholes the researchers used to monitor them. Eventually, they all became quiet. The researchers offered to free one of them if they complied with them to let them in to check the equipment. One of them responded with, "We no longer wish to be freed." After 15 days, the researchers decided to open the chamber. What they found inside was truly horrifying. One of the men lay dead, his organs used to block the drain, and the others had chunks of their flesh and fingertips missing. With their food stores virtually untouched, it appeared they had begun to eat themselves. One of the men who had been screaming earlier had his own vocal cords torn, which explained why he'd gone quiet. We possibly got a hint of this with Thomas Clark. The researchers removed the men from the chamber in order to provide medical assistance, but one thing all the survivors did was demand to be put back in, begging for more of the gas. Now there is a lot of debate to whether this story is even real. Many people believe that this story was fake, owing to the fact that the original creepypasta was based on a fake image, but some people still believe that it's based on true events. But either way, there are several links to Poppy Playtime. First, the hunger for flesh while food is readily available sounds eerily similar to the teacher Mr. Light in Chapter 3. I stated in my last video that she claimed to be starving, yet the vending machines all around the school remained untouched. She too had a hunger for flesh. But the obvious connection between the two is the gas. In Poppy Playtime, a gas was used, but this time for the opposite effect. This gas was used to put children to sleep, but just like in the creepypasta, the children slowly started to go crazy too. Marie Payne was the orphan that would later become Mommy Longlegs, and we saw firsthand that she still had a crazy side. Throughout that chapter, she forced us to play with her, with the creeping undertone that she wanted us to fail, wanted us to die. When we eventually escaped though and stopped playing by her rules, her true personality came through, with a change in her eyes to boot. I think this behaviour was in part brought on by psychological damage caused by the gas, and of course being surrounded by all these creepy experiments. Going back to the space references though, I really do think that Poppy Playtime is leaning into the Portal and Bioshock route, a man who played God and tried to create his own utopia. The playcare looks just like a nuclear bunker, and Elliot talks about wanting to keep children safe. This is his very own Garden of Eden. With Elliot's links to the two world wars and America's rivalry with the Soviet Union, I think we can start to piece this puzzle together. Remember, America and Russia have both been trying to outdo each other throughout history. The Cold War between these two countries was at one point so intense that many people speculated one of the countries were going to start using nuclear weapons. Perhaps this explains why the playcare looks like this, designed to be sealed in case of a catastrophic event on the surface. If you want to get really crazy with it though, perhaps the company took this one step further and tried to make plans to explore space in case the Earth ever became uninhabitable. This would make a lot of the biblical references make sense, the facility being an ark of sorts. The Cold War, after all, was also famous for the two countries trying to outdo each other in technological advancement too. This became known as the space race, and perhaps these space references are a nod to that. Or it could all just be that Playtime Co. were involved in the space race in a different way. Perhaps this was their attempt to secure government funding. Either way, the links to Soviet Russia keep increasing, and I have no doubt that this is more than just a throwaway reference at this point. There are so many hidden details in Poppy Playtime. I hope you enjoyed my 2 videos. I am going to start working on my theories now though, so keep an eye out for those. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.